The evening wind was dry as bone when Elias Boone first saw her, a figure half swallowed by the earth, where the dying sun burned red through the dust. He'd been riding home from town, hat low, saddle creaking, when something in the road made his horse shy. At first, he thought it was another ghost from memory, the kind that sometimes rose from the desert heat and wore his boy's face. But then she moved. Her wrists were bound. Her face turned upward, streaked with dirt and dried blood. Her voice came out cracked and hollow, a whisper that carried farther than it should have. "I beg you." "Just make it quick," Elias froze. The world seemed to stop breathing. The prairie around him shimmered like a great golden sea, endless and godless. For a moment, he didn't know if she spoke to him or to some shadow that came before. He dismounted slowly, boots crunching the brittle earth. "You hurt bad?" She flinched at the sound, crawling back as far as the ropes would let her. Her dress was torn, once blue, now the color of clay, and her eyes darted everywhere but his. "Please," she rasped. "If you're with them, just don't talk." "Make it quick," Elias's chest tightened. He hadn't heard a voice like that. Raw with fear, soft with surrender. "Since the war, I ain't with no one," he said quietly. "And I don't kill strangers." The woman's body slumped. She looked ready to crumble into the dust that held her. Elias took a knife from his belt, cut her free, and caught her before she fell. She was light, all bones and tremble. When he lifted her into his arms, the smell of smoke and blood mixed with something faint, lavender maybe, from another life. He carried her to his horse and laid her gently across the saddle. "You'll ride," he murmured. "Ain't far now." By the time they reached his cabin, the sun was gone, and the sky had turned the color of spilled ink. He set her down inside, lit the lantern, and knelt beside her. She stared at him through half-closed eyes. "Why help me?" He poured water into a tin cup and handed it to her. "'Cause nobody else would." As she drank, her hands trembled so violently he had to steady the cup for her. She coughed, then whispered, "They'll come. Sheriff Maddox. He'll hang me and you with me." He paused, his face hardening like weathered wood. "Sheriff Maddox can go to hell." She looked at him then, really looked, and seemed startled by what she saw. His face bore the kind of sorrow only the land could carve, a jaw set in silence, eyes that once believed in something. When he turned back to the fire, the flicker caught a small wooden horse on the mantel, a toy, smoothed by a child's touch. "Your son?" she asked softly. He didn't answer. The wind outside sighed through the cracks. By dawn, word had already spread. May Harper, who ran the general store and never missed a chance to trade gossip, had seen the stranger drawing water from the well. Sleeves rolled up, hair wet, trying to look invisible. But in a town like Dry Creek, invisibility was a kind of confession. By noon, Sheriff Maddox rode up the ridge with 2 deputies and a storm of dust behind him. He was a tall man, neat as a sermon, eyes sharp and cold. Elias met them at the door, unarmed, hands steady. "Mornin', Sheriff," he said. Maddox looked past him into the cabin, where Clara Wynne, the name rolled off his tongue like poison, stood by the fire, pale and still. "Well now," Maddox drawled. "Seems the good ranch has taken to harboring a fugitive." Elias didn't blink. "She's hurt. She stays till she ain't. That so?" The sheriff's lip curled. "You were once a decent man, Boone. Folks admired you. Hard work, quiet ways. Don't ruin that memory for her." Elias stepped closer. "That memory's been dead a long while, Sheriff. For a heartbeat." They stood face to face, 2 men cut from different cloths, but sewn with the same pride. Maddox finally spat in the dirt, turned his horse and said, "You've got till sundown." When the riders vanished, the silence felt heavier than before. Inside, Clara sat by the fire, her eyes on the door. "He'll come back," she whispered. Elias nodded. "Let him." She looked at him for a long moment, then said, "You don't even know what I've done." "Don't need to," he said simply. That night, rain came sudden and cold. It rattled the roof, seeped through the cracks, whispered down the chimney like ghosts. Elias sat at the table, whittling a piece of wood with the care of a man afraid to stop moving. Across from him, Clara watched the flames dance, the light catching her cheekbones, turning them to gold. I was a saloon girl, she said at last. Her voice was low, barely above the storm. In Red Mesa, a man, Jacob Gray, came in one night, said he loved me. I believed him. Her hands twisted in her lap. He robbed the bank 2 days later. Killed a man. Then he ran, left me behind with his name in my pocket. Sheriff Maddox took me in, said he'd protect me if I stayed quiet. But when I wouldn't, he branded me his whore instead, the knife stilled in Elias's hand. Her eyes lifted, meeting his through the shadows. You think less of me now, don't you? He stared into the fire, the orange glow deepening the scars on his face. I think of the lies I used to tell myself, about what makes a person worth saving. A silence stretched between them, long and heavy, but not cold. Outside, the rain softened, and for the first time, Clara breathed without flinching. At dawn, the sound of horses shattered the quiet. Elias stepped out onto the porch, his rifle resting in his hands, the horizon pink with sunrise. Sheriff Maddox was back, this time alone, his expression carved from stone. Morning again, Boone, he said, voice low. I figure I gave you time enough to do the right thing. Elias said nothing. Maddox tossed a rope into the dirt. Hand her over, or I'll drag her out myself and hang you beside her for company. Clara appeared in the doorway behind him, barefoot, trembling. Her voice barely rose above the wind. Please, just make it quick. The words froze Elias where he stood. The same words she'd said when he found her. But now they struck deeper, like a knife through the quiet redemption he'd been building all night. He looked at her, then at the sheriff, then down at the rope. For a long moment, no one moved. Even the wind seemed to wait. Then Elias did the unthinkable. He dropped his rifle. Kneeling in the dirt, he wrapped his coat around Clara's shoulders, shielding her from the morning chill, and when he stood, his voice was steady as the land itself. She's under my protection now, Maddox sneered. You've lost your mind, Boone. Maybe, Elias said. But I ain't lost my soul. The sheriff's hand flashed to his gun, steel catching sunlight, and the sound that followed split the air like thunder, a single shot. Dust rose. Horses screamed. Then silence. The morning wind carried the echo away, over the wide and merciless land, leaving behind only 2 shadows in the dust, and a question the earth itself refused to answer. The gunshot hung in the air long after the echo died. For a heartbeat, the whole world seemed to hold still, the horizon trembling in gold, dust swirling slow as smoke. Then came the sound of something heavy hitting the ground. Elias Boone staggered backward, his hand pressed to his side, warm blood seeping through his shirt. Sheriff Maddox lay a few feet away, his pistol fallen beside him, a dark stain spreading beneath his chest. The wind picked up again, whispering through the mesquite. Clara dropped to her knees beside Elias. Her hands fluttered helplessly, pressing against his wound, her face streaked with dirt and tears. Don't you dare, she whispered. Don't you dare leave me now. He gave a crooked half-smile, breath ragged. Didn't plan on going anywhere, just need a minute to breathe. She tore her shawl into strips, binding the wound as best she could. Her fingers trembled, slick with blood and rainwater, but her voice steadied. You're going to live. You hear me? You're going to live, he grunted, eyes half-lidded. You said make it quick. Guess I ain't much good at that. Despite everything. A weak laugh escaped her throat. A sound that cracked open something fragile between them. They stayed like that until the light changed, until the sun rose fully and the desert began to glow again, as if the land itself wanted to forget what it had just witnessed. By noon, Elias was fading in and out of sleep. Clara had dragged him inside, washed his wound, and stacked furniture against the door. She worked like a woman possessed, the kind who'd known loss before and refused to meet it again. When she finally sat beside him, her hands raw from scrubbing blood off the floorboards, she whispered, They'll come for us. The sheriff's men, he opened one eye, voice slurred but certain. Then we best not be here when they do. It took them hours to saddle the horse, and by dusk, they were gone, a ragged pair riding west beneath the bleeding sunset. Behind them, Dry Creek whispered their names with scorn, the rancher and the saloon girl, the murderer and the whore, And yet, the wind carried another version too, quieter, more merciful. The man who chose mercy over law. They rode through the Badlands until the stars came out, sharp and endless. The cold bit through their clothes, and Elias swayed in the saddle, half-conscious. Clara held the reins, one hand steady on his back to keep him upright. When the horse stumbled at the edge of a narrow ravine, she pulled them to a stop. A small river shimmered below, moonlight catching on the current. "We rest here," she said, though he couldn't hear her anymore. She slid him down gently, her knees sinking into the cold mud. His skin felt like ice, and for a moment, terror seized her, the kind that steals the breath clean out of your chest. But she refused to let it win. She built a fire with shaking hands, fed it with dry grass and scraps of her dress until the flames grew tall and gold. Then she bathed his wound with river water, whispering prayers she barely remembered. "Don't die, Elias Boone," she murmured. "You ain't finished yet. Not till you've seen what kindness looks like." Hours passed. The fire crackled low, and dawn began to pale the horizon. The air was heavy with river mist, soft and silver. Clara knelt beside him, watching his chest rise and fall, shallow but steady. When he finally stirred, she caught her breath. His voice came rough, like dry gravel. "You stayed," she smiled faintly. "Didn't seem right to leave you after you ruined your life for me." "Ruin's just another word for changed," he said. Then softer. "You saved mine first." The river ran clear beside them, its surface trembling with light. Clara dipped her hands into it, scooped the cold water, and let it fall over his wound, over her own shaking fingers, over everything they'd been before that night. It felt like a baptism. He reached for her hand. Their fingers met, tentative, trembling, but neither pulled away. "I was dead long before I found you," he whispered. Her voice broke when she answered. "And I was never alive till you stopped to look." They stayed by the river for 2 days, letting the land hide them. The second night, the sky opened. Rain falling soft and heavy, blurring the stars. Clara laughed through the drops, holding her face up to the storm. Elias watched her, smiling despite the pain. "Ain't seen rain like this in years." "It feels like starting over," she said. He nodded, and something eased in him. The years of silence, the guilt carved deep as canyon walls. For once, the wind didn't sound like ghosts. When morning came, the world smelled of wet earth and pine. They packed what little they had left and followed the river north, into the hills where the pines grew thick and the world grew quiet. They found an old cabin half burned from some forgotten fire. The walls still stood, though the roof gaped open to the sky. "This'll do," Elias said, voice faint but sure. Clara looked at him, skeptical. "Do for what?" He smiled, small, worn but real. "For living." She laughed then, a sound brighter than the fire they built that night. They worked side by side, patching holes, cutting wood, mending what could be saved. Elias still moved slow, pain shadowing every step, but his eyes were clearer now. Sometimes she caught him watching her while she worked, not with hunger, but with quiet awe, as if she were proof that something good could still exist in a world like theirs. He never spoke the word love. He didn't have to. It was there in the small things, in the way he made her coffee before dawn, or how he left a blanket folded near her chair. It was there in silence, in breath, in the spaces between. And she returned it not with promises, but with presence, by staying, by smiling when he forgot how, by humming lullabies to the evening air. Spring came slow. The pines turned green again. Wildflowers grew near the steps of their rebuilt home, where ashes once lay. Elias's wound healed to a thin scar, pale and honest. Sometimes, when he woke in the early light, he would reach for the revolver still hanging by the door, then remember he didn't need it anymore. One morning he saddled his horse. Clara met him at the gate, eyes questioning. "I'm going back to town," he said, "to finish what I started." Fear flickered across her face. "They'll arrest you." "Maybe," he said. "But I can't keep running from ghosts. Not if I mean to live." She stepped closer, her voice trembling. Then come back. Promise me you'll come back. He touched her cheek, thumb brushing a tear away. You have my word. When he rode into Dry Creek, people stared but didn't speak. Time had dulled the fire of gossip. Even May Harper kept her eyes on her broom. Elias tied his horse outside the church and walked in, hat in hand. Reverend Dwyer stood at the altar, old and gray, his eyes wide at the sight of him. I came to tell the truth, Elias said, voice quiet but clear. Sheriff Maddox drew first. I shot to save a life, not take one. The Reverend swallowed hard. The town knows, Elias. The circuit judge ruled it self-defense months ago. Elias blinked. Then why's no one said so? Because folks prefer their villains simple, the Reverend said softly. But that don't mean heaven does. Elias nodded, left his gun on the altar, and walked back into the light. When he returned to the cabin, Clara was in the doorway, hair loose in the wind, her smile small but certain. He stopped a few steps away, heart aching with quiet relief. Guess I ain't much good at making it quick, he said. She laughed through her tears. Then don't ever try, he stepped forward, pulling her close. And the world seemed to hush, the pines swaying, the birds rising into the sky. They stood there a long while, the kind of long that only love and forgiveness can measure. That night, the firelight flickered against the walls, and Clara rested her head on his shoulder. Do you think folks will ever forgive us? She asked. Elias looked out at the stars, soft and endless. Maybe, but I reckon we already did the harder thing, forgave ourselves. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain. The land slept, and for the first time in years, the man who once prayed for an ending found peace in the promise of another morning.